So you and we're about to go on a little adventure together. That adventure is going to span 118 years of Tudors, and it's going to be one generation at a time. How does that sound to you? I'll be your host this evening. My name is Christina. Thank you for joining us here at my Tudor era Tapestry. Lady Jane Parker was about to become Lady Jane Boleyn. All of the contracts had been signed and all of the dresses had been fitted. Jane was a beautiful blushing bride at 19. She was a lot older for marriage than many of her friends, but she had been thankful for the time at court she had to grow up, have some fun, and make many friends. Now she was going to be a proper married lady. George was so handsome in his wedding clothes, and Jane could not have imagined a more perfect wedding. There had been some awkward family issues, muddying the day a bit, but it would be lovely either way. Anne had been sent away from court. Her pursuit of Henry Percy had hit a breaking point, and Anne had been sent home to Hever to mend her broken heart. Henry had also been sent home. He was going to marry Lady Mary Talbot. The lovers had not received the future they had wanted, and neither were happy about it. George's sister Mary was married, and their marriage seemed a happy one. She had retired away from court when it was discovered that she was with child. Sometimes Jane felt like she was walking a fine line, having been so friendly with Mary, and being in the Queen's good graces was not an easy combination to succeed at. By the day's end, she would be Lady Jane Boleyn. They were young, and did not have much. The king had granted George a stipend of £20 per annum. It was not a lot, but it would help supplement their court lives. This was the start of a magical life, and Janie wanted nothing more than to share it with dear George. Lady Marie of Guise was 9 years old, and completely at home with the sisters of the convent where she resided with her lady grandmother. Lady Philippa was 60 years old and quite pious. Marie had resided here with her grandmother and the sisters for 4 years. She had learned a great deal of Latin, something most girls her age could only imagine. Marie wished she could be with her family, but she thought that the peaceful quiet of the convent suited her more than a house full of 4 very young children. She was, after all, a pious young lady of good breeding. Her one job was to marry well, and the sisters were preparing her for that life. Lady Mary Carey was in the midst of her labor pains with her first child in early 1524. She had retired from court to her husband's family estate. Lady Mary was 25 years old and she felt at home. She had not spent a lot of time at home with her own family recently. They had full lives that did not always lend itself much to family time. Mary wished her sister Anne could be with her, but Anne was young and childless. She could not. Mary endured the last few hours of her pains and delivered a healthy baby girl. For a moment, Mary considered naming her after her sister Anne, or her mother Elizabeth. But William still worked for the king, and he wished to name her after Queen Catherine. Catherine had entered a world that felt more secure than it was. She knew her mother, who had survived her birth, and was keeping her swaddled and warm. In time, Cathy would learn some of the troubles that surrounded her birth. She would learn that her parents' marriage was difficult at times. Her father worked for the king, and until recently, her mother had worked for the queen. The trouble came with the rumors that the king may be Cathy's true father. These were rumors around court, but she would never know if they were true. Some would say the rumors were spread by supporters of her namesake, Queen Catherine. Cathy did not know that after a scandalous removal from court life, that her Aunt Anne was returning, and the same king had eyes on the second Boleyn sister. Catherine would grow up for a time with her parents, but she was destined from the beginning to be the talk of court life. Lady Catherine Willoughby sat in her garden watching the bunnies play as she listened to her nurse telling her a tale of princesses. England had a princess. Her name was Mary. She was 3 years older than Kit. Princess Mary was 8 years old, and she was going to be a grand queen someday. Maybe Kit would attend her at a masque. Her mother could take her to court when she was older. Kit could not wait until she could join her parents at court. Some girls were allowed to join at 12 years old, and Kit thought that she could be one of those girls. Or, if Princess Mary married the emperor, maybe she could go to Spain. Kit attended her, and they could take the same journey their mothers had 2 decades ago in reverse. Kit's nurse told her about the French princesses. France had 3, Charlotte, Madeleine, and Marguerite. They had a 4th sister, Louise, but she had died long ago. She thought about what it would be like to grow up with sisters. She had no way of knowing. It had always been just her. Kit and her nurses made for a quiet house, but she did not know another life. It may be nice to have some other girls to grow up alongside. In the summer of 1524, Princess Madeleine was preparing to move, along with her baby sister, to a new residence where they would be primarily in the care of their aunt, Marguerite d'Angoulême. Their mother had died in January. Some had said she was just worn out from so many childbeds. There were even some whispers that she had been pregnant again, and something had gone wrong, or that the 24-year-old queen just had nothing left to give. 2 months after the death of Queen Claude, her daughter, Madeleine's sister, Charlotte, contracted the measles. Charlotte had always been frail. She had come down with many illnesses, and even minor illnesses took her down. The measles is what took her life. Princess Madeleine had lost her mother and her older sister a mere 2 months apart. Madeleine and Margaret would be living with their aunt, Marguerite, now. Madeleine loved her Aunt Marguerite. She had resided with the royal family after Claude's death. She had been the one left to care for Charlotte as she died. Madeleine's father, King Francis, had been away at war and had left his children in the care of his sister. Marguerite had done a valiant job, but the measles had taken young Charlotte. Madeleine missed her father and brothers since she moved. She was only 4 years old. She would have baby Margaret with her, though. Everything was changing rapidly, and Madeleine felt the earth shift under her feet. Sir Edward Seymour, brother of Lady Jane Seymour, had received a grand promotion. He had not been a knight long, but he had proved himself in jousts and war before this, and he was skilled. He was being placed as esquire of the king's household. He would be protecting everyone in the household of the king. The king had men for immediate security needs, but if anything additional was needed, Edward could be called upon for service. Jane could not be any happier. She had hoped her brother would put in a word with someone who could find her a position at court. She was 16, and she felt she had all of the skills she would need for an entry position attending the queen. They sometimes called girls as young as 12 for those positions. Jane was much older than that. She had high hopes she would acquire a position, but she had competition. There were many girls that wanted the same position as Jane. These girls' fathers were more powerful than a knight. Some of them were the daughters of dukes or earls. Jane loved her father, but it would have helped a great deal if he had acquired a title higher than knight. Jane would just have to push a little harder. Maybe her newly promoted brother could help. Jane was starting to worry. She was 16, and no one had asked for her hand. What if no one did? She would just have to live at the whims of her father and then her brother. She hoped that they would see that a position at court could gain her a marriage that would help them to rise as well. Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, had done it again. His lady wife, Lady Mary Brandon, could not believe it had happened. Again. How stupid could one man be? Charles had a second illegitimate child with a second woman. He had just come out and told Mary this time. He had said he missed her while he was away at court. He needed to find someone to keep him company. Mary was furious. To add insult to injury, they had named this little girl Frances. That was the name of her fiery 7-year-old. Charles was 40 years old. He was supposed to be settling down, not starting families all over the kingdom. In true Charles fashion, he was recognizing this child, and would likely be sending her mother some kind of stipend. Mary was thankful that her brother, King Henry, was so generous with his best friend and his sister. Charles was going to send them to the poorhouse if he kept up this behavior. Mary wished he would think of his family. At 28, she would likely outlive her husband. She would appreciate not having to take care of his list of nameless mistresses. Catherine of Aragon, Queen of England, was shocked at receiving news of her sister-in-law Meg, Queen of Scots. Meg had staged a coup. Catherine did not know Meg had such a spark inside of her. Catherine had been hearing her sister-in-law had been having a hard time. They had not stayed in close touch after the mess of Flodden. King James had attacked the English, and Catherine had not known he would die. They had been obligated to defend the realm. Since Flodden, Meg had both of her children removed from her custody. She was alone until now. When the regent left for France, she had put into motion a plan that had taken preparation. She had the king, her son, moved into her custody. The royal lords had just agreed. When the regent's wife died in France, he was delayed, and Parliament decided the king's minority rule was over. He was king at 12, and he needed no guardian. It was up to the king if he wished to see his mother. From what whispers Catherine had heard, the king did wish to see his mother. Catherine had always liked Meg since they were young. She was happy for her sister's latest success. It almost distracted her from the birth of her lady, Mary's baby, rumored to be her husband's. This year, Princess Mary Tudor's education had intensified. Preparations were being made for her to be moved into her own residence. She had mixed feelings about this. It would mean she would see her mother less, but she was getting older. At 8, she should be ready for her own residence. From the sound of it, her new residence would be rather far. In Wales, it would take some time to travel there, and visits home would be rare. She was probably going to end up at Ludlow Castle. Ludlow was an intimidating place. It was where her Uncle Arthur had lived when he had been married to her mother. It was also where he died. Ludlow always sounded so cold and remote, but it was where the English royals sent the heir to the throne to prepare them to rule. Mary would not be named Princess of Wales, but her mother had assured her that this was the next step on her way to becoming Queen of England. Mary would do her very best and try to ignore the gnawing feeling of uncertainty deep inside. Princess Anna von Jülich-Kleefberg was allowed some time away from her mother's court now that she was 9 years old. She was almost independent. She was not permitted to go off on her own, but she did enjoy sitting in the kitchens and listening to the staff and all of the updates they had received of the goings-on of Cleves and sometimes beyond. The latest news was on the revolt of German peasants. The fighting had not reached Cleves. The nearest revolt was far away to the southeast. Agnes, one of the cooks, had assured her that they were over 200 kilometers away. She had nothing to worry about. Anna liked Agnes. She was soft and smelled like fresh bread. Sometimes she would sneak Anna sweets. As Anna nibbled on a small tart she had received from Agnes with a small wink, she listened to all of the adults talking. The peasants were not happy, and they were making it known. They wanted to be able to elect their own pastors. They wanted a say in who was overseeing their spiritual needs. They wanted a say in what tithes they were required to pay, and they wanted to decide where the extra money went to help their communities. Anna thought that surely they could trust the people in charge to spend their money properly. They were men of God. The peasants wanted access to game and fish that had always been reserved for noble and royal households. Anna understood that everyone needed to hunt or fish to feed themselves, but if everyone did it at their own discretion, food could become scarce. They wanted regulations on labor, rent, wages, and fines. It seemed to Anna that it was very expensive to be poor. She hoped that she would not be in a position to ever find out for sure. Being poor seemed awful to a 9-year-old just finishing her tart. She washed the jelly off her sticky fingers. She heard the last of the complaints had to do with the laws. They wanted laws that were just not arbitrary in nature. Not all of the landowners were as just as her father. Some of them sounded very harsh indeed. Anna did not fully understand why so many peasants were so angry, but she did find herself sympathizing with them sometimes. They seemed like people who were just trying to feed their families, and everyone deserved a tart sometimes. In the early autumn of 1524, Lady Catherine Parr was 12 years old and entering her marital age. The plans were in full swing to find her a husband of appropriate rank. Her father had passed 7 years earlier, but he had left substantial dowries for both her and her sister. No decisions had been made. Her mother was very busy with the Queen. Cat would rather wait in any case. The court sounded like far more fun than marrying and having children. If she delayed marriage, she could also get a job as governess in a noble household. She had an exemplary education. She would be a highly valued governess to a lot of families. Her mother was accepting offers, though. It was just a matter of time. The last time Maud Parr had visited, they had talked about marriage, and she had told Cat that she was not in a hurry to find a match. She had also shared that the king's men were away fighting in France. The king had not joined him, but Charles Brandon was having great success. Cat shared her mother's view that God was most definitely on the side of the English. Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk, was doing grand things and allowing God's glory to shine down on all of them. Cat had also learned that preparations were being made to move Princess Mary to her own residence at Ludlow. Cat did not understand why she was not being allowed to go with her. She was 3 years older than the princess. She thought that she could be a great help in the household, along with being a peer and a confidant. Her mother had told her she must wait. Cat did not understand why she had to wait to attend the princess, but not wait to get married. Lady Margaret Pole was 51 years old and preparing for a new stage in life. She was a grandmother now, and her children were grown. Princess Mary Tudor was being relocated to her own residence in Wales, at Ludlow. Maggie had been tasked with escorting her up there and staying on as head lady-in-waiting and transition governess. The princess was soon aging out of needing a governess, but she would still need some guidance. With so many successful adult children, Maggie was the perfect option to help the princess transition from childhood into a young lady. 2 of Maggie's sons were abroad with the Duke of Suffolk. They were winning great glory for England. Henry was supporting Lord Brandon as Lord Montague with his forces. Arthur was fighting with Lord Brandon's forces as one of his trusted knights. Maggie was so proud of her sons. They had risen so far in their circles. She missed them when they were away, and that was often. But she was happy they were growing into proper noble gentlemen. She had also received word from several people that her sweet cousin Meg had staged a coup up in Scotland. Maggie had been surprised. Meg had always been so submissive and obedient. Maggie would not have thought she could stage a coup, let alone a successful one. But she had, and Parliament had gone along with the plans of their dear, sweet Dowager Queen. Maggie was so happy for her sweet cousin. Things had been hard on her since the death of her first husband, King James. She now had custody of her 12-year-old son, the King of Scots. Maggie was also worried. Meg had a lot more power. She had powerful allies, but she also had powerful enemies. Margaret Tudor, Dowager Queen of Scots, had experienced a rough but progressive year. She had decided that the men who were in charge of her life were not serving her as her late husband would have liked. She had started lightly asking around and gathered up quite a lot of powerful men who did not seem entirely pleased with the regent, and then they had all silently waited for their moment. The regent of Scotland had felt secure. John had left with his young wife Anne for France. Meg was fairly certain France was where he preferred to be in any case. They had left in May, and Meg's pawns had started moving into place. Meg's son, King James, had been moved into her physical custody. The reunion had been awkward at first. Young King James barely knew his mother, and he was not sure he could trust her motives. Meg had assured him that she had nothing but the best intentions for his future. She had told him he was 12 years old, and he was capable of running the kingdom without the assistance of a regent. Meg had been able to gain some of his trust, but rebuilding her relationship with her son would take time. God had then seen fit to take John Stuart's wife while they were in France. Meg had said a prayer for the young girl's soul, but she was, deep down, thankful for the extra time it afforded her. John Stuart had heard about the removal of the king, but he was required to stay in France to make arrangements for his wife's burial. There was nothing he could do. By August, John Stuart had still not returned. Scotland had been without a regent for quite some time, and, secret coup aside, things had been running smoothly. It was just proving Meg's point that King James did not need an official guardian to run Scotland. Everything was going smoother than she could have ever anticipated. Parliament, with the urging of Meg's trusted lords, had agreed. The king did not require a guardian or a regent. King James was the King of Scots, full stop. He could reside with his mother if he wished. But it was not a requirement. As king, he was free to do what he wished. As a 12-year-old son, he had missed his mother these last 11 years and wished to stay a while and get to know her. Meg's estranged husband, Archibald, had heard the news of the regent's removal. He had assumed Meg was weak, and with the regent gone, he could return and take things over as the stepfather of the young king. He had returned from exile, marched north from England with a small contingent of men. Meg had not received him respectfully. Archibald had no right to her son's kingdom, or her personal peace so newly achieved. She had allowed the English envoys an audience to plead his case. They had done their best, but Meg was not in a forgiving mood. She had spent much time and energy on setting things straight. He was not going to return and just ruin it. Ignoring the pleading of the English envoys, Meg ordered the cannons be pointed right at Archibald and his contingent. His envoys' words had fallen on deaf ears, and Dowager Queen Meg had told them that Archibald and his men would have to leave. He was not welcome in her castle or in Scotland. Archibald had no choice but to leave with his tail between his legs. She only had to fire a few cannons. The English ambassadors had tried to say she could not fire on her legal husband. Meg responded by telling them to go home and not meddle with Scottish matters. Lady Anne Boleyn's plans had failed. She had tried her very hardest to convince anyone with any power that she was meant to be with Henry Percy. Unfortunately, the King's Chancellor, Cardinal Wolsey, had decided that the original betrothal to Mary Talbot had to be respected. Mary's father was more powerful than Anne's father. Anne had hoped that her sister Mary could help her. Mary had the king's ear. She had been the king's favorite for years now, but she had left court to become mother. Anne was on her own, and did not know how Mary could be so stupid. Anne would not be foolish enough to get pregnant with the king's baby, only to be put aside. Henry had made promises to Anne, and she believed him. He had tried. Everyone had conspired against them. Anne had been removed from public, and she had been sent home to Hever to repent. Henry had been married to Mary Talbot. Anne had hoped they would be very happy together, though she doubted they would be. Anne's brother George had gotten married this year. The bride was Janie Parker. She had been making eyes at George for several years. She had finally gotten what she wanted. Anne tried her best to be happy for the girl, but she was jealous that Janie had gotten the life she had wanted while Anne had not. More than anything, what Anne wanted now was revenge on the man who had crushed her dreams. Cardinal Wolsey, the king's chancellor, had been the strongest voice for separating Anne and Henry. She was not sure how she would do it, but Anne wanted revenge against this cardinal, and she would not let this go lightly. Lady Catherine Howard was a happy 1-year-old who was delightfully unaware of the struggles her family was facing. She was the youngest of 11 children, and because of that, was occasionally overlooked. However, she was the baby of the family, and because of that, she was at times the star of the show. Her family was facing poverty. It was not extreme, but it was a struggle. In the past, Kate's father had relied on his own father to get him out of his debts. Recently, though, Kate's grandfather had died. It was no longer the soft landing that the Howard family had relied on. His lands and titles had passed to his eldest son. His eldest son was not Kate's father. Now, if Edmund gambled away more funds than he possessed, his father could not help him escape it. He could go instead to his older brother for help, but he was not as likely to save Edmund from his uncontrolled vices. You can share your thoughts with me at longlivethequeenpodcast@gmail.com. Slide into my DMs on Facebook or Instagram at Long Live the Queen Podcast, or join the party on Patreon, where we have extended episodes and bonus content.